I was born in New York City, America, on a cold January morning. My earliest memories are of tall buildings, yellow taxis, and my father's strict voice echoing in our grand family townhouse on Fifth Avenue. My mother, Margaret, was gentle, quiet, and often overshadowed by the strong presence of my father, Richard Miller. He was a man who believed in tradition, order, and the weight of a family name. He was respected in Wall Street circles, admired by politicians, and feared by competitors. Yet for me, growing up in his shadow was not easy. From the time I was a child, he reminded me that the true heirs of his fortune and reputation were not supposed to be daughters but sons. But I was not like the women my father knew. I had fire inside me. By the time I was 10, I was reading financial newspapers instead of children's magazines. While my brother David was outside playing basketball with friends, I was sitting at the mahogany desk in the library, learning the meaning of interest rates, profits, and investments. My father would glance at me and smile faintly, but he always dismissed my ambition as nothing more than a girl's curiosity. He believed that one day I would marry well and that the family empire would pass naturally to my brother. I refused to accept that destiny. When I graduated from Harvard at 21, I didn't rely on my father's name or money. I stepped into the business world with nothing but my determination and a loan I had earned through my own credibility. I started small, buying a crumbling building in Lower Manhattan, turning it into modern offices, and renting them out to young tech companies. It worked. Within a year, I had doubled my investment. Then I bought another building and another. Soon, I was moving into San Francisco, working with innovators and visionaries. I knew where the future was heading, and I built myself into it. By the time I was 35, I was not just successful, I was powerful. My net worth had crossed $8 billion, and my name was known from Wall Street to London. I own hotels in Paris, resorts in Rome, and partnerships in Madrid. My face was on the cover of magazines in America and Europe. People called me one of the youngest women in history to create a multi-billion-dollar empire from scratch. But despite all the glory, I carried one burden that never left me: my father's refusal to acknowledge me as the rightful heir of the family. It was during a summer evening in Miami when the clash finally happened. I had recently moved into a new glass-walled mansion overlooking the ocean. The house itself was like a symbol of what I had achieved: sharp, modern, shining in the sunlight. I loved the way the Atlantic waves seemed to bow at my windows, as though they too respected my rise. That evening, I was sitting in the living room, sipping a glass of red wine, reviewing contracts for a new hotel project in Los Angeles. The sound of the waves outside mixed with the clicking of my pen. Then my father entered the room. Richard Miller was 70 by then, his once black hair now silver, his posture still upright, his voice still commanding. He looked around my mansion with a strange expression, not admiration, but judgment. He sat down across from me without asking, as though the house still belonged to him. For a while, he said nothing, and I continued reading, pretending not to notice the storm brewing in his silence. Finally, he spoke. "Clara, it is time for you to hand over your empire to David." I froze, my pen dropping to the table. At first, I thought I had misheard him. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "You heard me," he said, his eyes hard. "This empire, these billions you control, it is time for them to be transferred to your brother. He will carry the family name forward. He is a man, and it is his duty." For a moment, I could only stare at him. My empire? My life's work? The hotels I had built brick by brick, the contracts I had fought for, the nights I had spent without sleep, chasing opportunities no one else saw? My father wanted me to hand all of that to David. The same David who had never held a real job for more than a year, who spent money recklessly on expensive cars and gambling tables in Las Vegas. I felt heat rise in my chest. "Father," I said, my voice sharper now, "I built this empire with my own hands. Every deal, every dollar, every stone in every building, I fought for it. David has done nothing but waste. You want me to hand it all to him because he is a man?" His jaw tightened. "It is not a question of what you built. It is a question of legacy." A woman cannot carry this family forward. People will not respect it. I laughed bitterly. People already respect me more than they ever respected David. They respect me because I earned it. I am not just your daughter. I am Clara Miller, and the world knows my name. For the first time, I saw anger flash in his eyes. My father, the man who rarely lost his composure, was shaken. You will regret this pride, Clara, he said coldly. Blood is blood. Family comes before your ambition. Family? I shot back. If family truly mattered to David, he wouldn't have drowned himself in debt and shame. He wouldn't have left you to cover his losses while I was building us a future. Do not speak to me of family when it was I who saved this name, not him. The silence between us was heavy. Outside, the waves crashed harder, as though the ocean itself was echoing my rage. My father rose slowly, his face pale. He did not shout. He did not argue, but his words cut deeper than any blade. You have chosen defiance over loyalty, and you will pay for it. He left the mansion without another word, his shadow stretching long across the marble floor as the doors closed behind him. I sat there, trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that my greatest battle was no longer against rivals in America or Europe. It was against my own blood. I knew then that this was not the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of a war. It was exactly 1 week after my confrontation with my father in Miami that I received an invitation from David. He called me from Chicago with a voice sweeter than honey, pretending nothing had happened between us, as if my refusal to give him my empire was a small misunderstanding. Clara, he said over the phone, I've been thinking a lot. Maybe I judged you too harshly. Let's talk this through like brother and sister. Come with me to Los Angeles. I have business there, and we can fly together on my jet. We'll clear the air. Every word from him was polished, careful, rehearsed. A part of me wanted to hang up on him, to tell him that after years of rivalry, after the poisonous jealousy I had endured from him, there was nothing left to talk about. But another part of me, the part still aching for family, wanted to believe him. Perhaps he truly wanted to make peace. Perhaps he had realized that my success did not diminish him, that we could still find a way to stand together. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The morning of the flight, the air in Chicago was sharp and cold, the kind that bites your skin even through thick coats. David's driver picked me up in a long black car and drove me straight to the private hangar. His jet gleamed on the tarmac, sleek and proud, painted in silver and navy blue. The crew greeted me with warm smiles, though I noticed something peculiar in the way they avoided my eyes, as though they were aware of something they weren't allowed to say. Inside the jet, everything sparkled with luxury. Soft cream-colored leather seats, polished wood panels, and a small bar stocked with expensive whiskey and champagne. David was waiting there in a tailored black suit, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his smile far too wide. He hugged me briefly, but it felt stiff, practiced. Clara, he said warmly, I'm glad you came. You won't regret it. We took off smoothly, climbing into the clear blue skies. At first, we sat across from each other, pretending to chat like old times. He spoke of Los Angeles, of investments, of his sudden desire to grow up and be more responsible. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't ignore. Every time he smiled, it didn't quite reach his gaze. Instead, his eyes glittered with something darker, something dangerous. By the time we reached 20,000 feet, the conversation had grown quieter. I turned to look out of the window, staring at the endless horizon, when I felt him move closer. His footsteps on the carpet were slow, deliberate, almost predatory. I turned back to him, and he leaned close to my ear. His voice dropped into a whisper so cold it pierced my skin. If you won't give me the empire, then I'll take it another way. My heart froze. Before I could react, his hands shoved me hard against the door of the cabin. For a moment, the world tilted upside down. I felt the roaring wind as the emergency hatch burst open, the deafening sound filling my head. I screamed as my body pitched forward into nothingness. The air tore at me, wild and merciless, and the earth below looked like a death sentence. I thought I was finished. I thought I would hit the ground and vanish from the world I had fought so hard to conquer. But fate, as always, had its own plans. Instead of the solid earth, my body crashed into water, a wide canal near St. Louis that snaked across the land like a silver ribbon. The impact knocked the breath out of me, the cold water cutting into my skin like knives. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell which way was up or down. My lungs screamed for air, and panic clawed at me. But survival is stitched into my soul. I forced my body to move, kicking upward until my head broke the surface. I coughed violently, water choking my throat, but the air had never tasted so sweet. Around me, the canal stretched wide and long, the banks distant but visible. I swam with trembling arms, the weight of my soaked clothes dragging me down. My mind was a storm: anger, disbelief, betrayal. My own brother had tried to kill me. My own blood. When I finally reached the muddy bank, I collapsed onto the ground, gasping, shivering, too weak to move. My body was scraped, bruised, and frozen, but my spirit burned hotter than ever. I rolled onto my back and looked up at the sky. Somewhere above, David's jet was still flying, cutting through the clouds as if nothing had happened. He thought he had won. He thought I was dead. Lying there in the dirt, I made myself a promise. I would not let David steal my empire. I would not let him take from me the life I had built with my own hands. If anything, his betrayal had only sharpened me, hardened me. He had declared war, and I was ready to fight. It took hours for me to find help. I stumbled into a small town on the edge of the canal, my clothes heavy, my hair plastered to my face, mud caked on my hands. People stared at me as though I was a ghost risen from the water. A kind woman named Eleanor, who ran a small diner, wrapped me in a blanket and gave me hot coffee. She didn't ask questions at first, only looked into my eyes with concern. I thanked her, though the words felt too small for the gift of her kindness. That night, I sat alone in a rented motel room, staring into the cracked mirror above the sink. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, but alive and burning with fury. I thought of my father's words, of his command to hand everything over to David. I thought of the smug smile David had worn as he whispered his threat. And I thought of the empire that had nearly cost me my life. I realized then that survival was not enough. I would have to fight not just to live, but to defend what was mine. I could no longer hope for family loyalty, no longer pretend that blood was enough to bind us. David had made his choice. He had tried to end me. Now I would end his ambitions. The fall had not destroyed me. It had only baptized me in fire and water. From that canal, I rose not as a victim, but as a woman reborn, sharper than ever, ready to take back everything that was mine. 2 days after my fall into the canal, I was back in New York City. The city looked the same as it always had. Yellow taxis fighting for space, horns blaring, people rushing along sidewalks with phones pressed to their ears. But for me, nothing felt the same. I walked into my Wall Street headquarters no longer as a woman managing an empire, but as a survivor carrying fire in my chest. The building itself had always been a symbol of my rise. A 40-story tower of steel and glass, it reflected the sky above and the bustling streets below. My office on the top floor overlooked the financial heart of America, a constant reminder of how far I had come. 2 days earlier, I had nearly lost it all. My empire, my life, my dignity, to the very man who shared my blood. But now, instead of mourning, I was preparing for justice. I knew David. He believed I was dead. He thought his push had erased me from existence, and in his arrogance, he would come to my office to celebrate, to stand in front of my executives, and to claim what was never his. The thought made my stomach twist, but it also gave me strength. I would not confront him with words this time. I would confront him with the truth, and with the law. The police had been waiting for me when I arrived in New York. Detective Maria Lopez was the one who led the investigation. She was a sharp woman in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had listened carefully as I described the fall, the canal, and the way David whispered before pushing me into the sky. She didn't doubt me for a second. Men like your brother always think they're untouchable, she told me. But arrogance is what gets them caught. Don't worry, Clara. We'll be ready for him. And so the plan was made. My executives were instructed to continue their work as if nothing had happened. The press was kept in the dark, waiting for a story they didn't yet know existed. Inside my office, however, police officers dressed in plain clothes waited silently, blending in as assistants and visitors. The stage was set. The morning he arrived, I sat in my office chair, my back straight, my hands calm on the polished wooden desk. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The building was too quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. Every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a drumbeat leading to an inevitable climax. Then, just before 10 o'clock, the elevator chimed. I heard his voice before I saw him. Loud, arrogant, confident. Gentlemen, ladies, today is a new day for the Miller Empire. He stepped out of the elevator wearing a black tailored suit, his hair slicked back, his smile wide. His confidence filled the lobby like poison gas. He shook hands with executives, slapped a man on the shoulder, and waved as if he were a king entering his throne room. Behind him trailed two of his closest friends, both men I had seen at his reckless parties in Las Vegas. I watched from my office doorway, hidden in the shadows, my heart pounding. My fists clenched at my sides as I thought of how close he had come to killing me. David strolled toward the boardroom, his voice booming. We've done it, friends. The empire is ours now. Clara, poor Clara, she couldn't handle the pressure. But we will honor her memory by taking this company even higher. The words made bile rise in my throat. To hear him speak of me in the past tense, to twist my legacy into his fantasy, it was unbearable. Then it happened. Detective Lopez stepped forward, her badge flashing under the lights. David Miller, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of your sister, Clara Miller. The room froze. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. David's smile collapsed into confusion, then into shock. What nonsense is this? He laughed nervously, looking around at the executives for support. You must be mistaken. My sister is. His words died in his throat as I stepped out of the shadows. The room gasped. Executives who had thought me dead now saw me standing alive, unbroken, stronger than before. I will never forget the look on David's face. His skin turned pale, his jaw slack, his eyes wide, as if he had seen a ghost. You tried to kill me, David, I said, my voice steady though my heart was racing. But you failed, and now you will answer for it. He stumbled backward, shaking his head. No, this isn't possible. You fell. I saw you, the officers closed in. He raised his hands, trying to talk his way out of it, but it was too late. The sound of handcuffs clicking around his wrists echoed through the room, like the end of a symphony. His friends tried to protest, but the police silenced them quickly. David Miller, Detective Lopez continued, you are charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. You will have your chance to speak in court. For now, you're coming with us. As they led him away, he twisted to look at me, his eyes burning with desperation. Clara, please. You can't do this to me. I'm your brother. I met his gaze with cold steel. You stopped being my brother the moment you pushed me out of that plane? The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, every major newspaper in America carried the headline, Billionaire Clara Miller survives murder attempt by her brother. Television screens in New York, Los Angeles, and even London broadcast the story, analysts speculating on how such a betrayal could happen within one of America's wealthiest families. Some painted David as reckless, others as monstrous. But the truth was simple. Greed had consumed him. The trial that followed was long and exhausting, but justice prevailed. Evidence was clear. Flight logs, testimonies from crew members, and my own survival. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a verdict, guilty. David was sentenced to 25 years in prison. I sat in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. Triumph because justice had been done. Sorrow because the boy I had once played with in our Fifth Avenue townhouse, the brother I had once loved, was gone forever, buried under his own jealousy and ambition. When the guards led him away in chains, he didn't look at me again. Perhaps he couldn't. I walked out of that courtroom into the bright New York sun, the air crisp and cool. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted my name, but I felt strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I had survived the fall. I had faced betrayal. And now, I had seen justice served. But I also knew my story was far from over. David's absence created not just peace, but also silence. And in silence, new chapters are always born. Years passed like pages turning in a book I never thought I'd live to finish. The trial, the prison sentence, and the constant reminders of my brother's betrayal eventually settled into the past, but they never fully left me. They were always there, shadows stretching over the brighter moments of my life. Yet, with each year that passed, I learned how to breathe again, how to rebuild not just my empire, but also my spirit. I moved my home base from New York City to Washington, D.C., buying a mansion on the edge of Georgetown. It was a white stone estate with wide porches, tall windows, and green gardens that spilled into the horizon. Unlike my glass house in Miami, which had been built to show my power, this home was different. It was softer, warmer, filled with trees and flowers instead of cold marble and steel. It felt less like a fortress and more like a sanctuary. I surrounded myself with art, books, and music. I filled the halls with paintings from Europe and sculptures I had collected in America. Every morning, I walked through the gardens, breathing in the scent of roses and lavender, letting myself believe I had finally found peace. But even in the calm, I could never fully escape the thought of David. His face would surface in my dreams, sometimes as the boy who once shared toys with me in our Fifth Avenue townhouse, sometimes as the man who shoved me toward death at 20,000 feet in the air. The day he returned came on a crisp autumn morning. The leaves in Washington were painted gold and red, swirling around my mansion as though the season itself had prepared for his arrival. I was in my study, reviewing new contracts for a hotel project in London, when my assistant hurried in. "Ms. Miller," she said softly, "there's someone at the gate. He says he's your brother." For a moment, my heart stopped. I hadn't seen him in over 2 decades. Time had blurred his features in my memory, but the wound he had left was as sharp as ever. Against my better judgment, I told her to let him in. I stood on the front steps as the black car pulled up. The man who emerged was not the brother I remembered. David was older, thinner, his once proud shoulders bent, his hair grayer than our father's had been in his final years. Prison had hollowed him out, stolen the arrogance that once burned in his eyes. He walked slowly toward me, and when he reached the foot of the steps, he fell to his knees. "Clara," he whispered, his voice cracked and broken. "Forgive me." The sight of him kneeling there should have softened me, but it didn't. My chest tightened with old memories, the roar of the wind in my ears, the icy slap of water as I hit the canal, the terror of nearly dying because of his greed. My hands shook, but my voice came out cold and steady. "Stay away from me, David. Forever." He lifted his head, tears shining in his eyes. "I've changed, Clara. I've paid for my sins. 25 years of my life gone. I've lost everything. Please, just give me a chance to make things right." I shook my head slowly. "You tried to kill me for money. That kind of wound doesn't heal, David. Not with time, not with apologies." His lips trembled, but he said nothing more. Guards escorted him away, and I turned back into my mansion without looking again. The door closed behind me, and I leaned against it, trembling. My heart ached with both anger and sorrow. Blood may tie people together, but sometimes blood is also the sharpest blade. It was soon after that moment that life surprised me with something I never expected: love. I met James Carter at a charity gala in Boston. He was a doctor, tall and kind, with a quiet confidence that reminded me of strength without arrogance. Unlike the men who often circled me for my wealth or influence, James didn't seem impressed by my billions. In fact, when I introduced myself as Clara Miller, owner of one of America's largest empires, he only smiled and said, "That's nice. But what do you love to do when you're not working?" That question startled me. No one had asked me that in years. Everyone always wanted to know about my next investment, my next deal, my next expansion into Europe. But James wanted to know me. Not my empire. Me. We began to see each other quietly. Dinners in small restaurants, long walks by the Potomac, evenings in his Boston apartment filled with laughter and warmth. He listened to me in a way no one else ever had. He never judged my scars, never pressed me about my past, though I eventually told him everything. When I finished, he took my hand and said, "What matters isn't what happened. What matters is that you're here, alive and strong." For the first time in my life, I felt seen not as a billionaire, not as a survivor, but as a woman deserving of love. A year later, we were married in a quiet church in Virginia. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras, no extravagant headlines. Only close friends, a few family members who still believed in me, and the sound of church bells ringing in the air. I wore a simple white gown, and James stood waiting for me at the altar with eyes full of love. When we exchanged vows, I felt something inside me shift. All the years of fighting, of building, of surviving, they had led me to this moment. I was not handing my empire away, nor was I living in fear of betrayal. I was stepping into a new life, one filled not with greed or ambition, but with love and peace. My empire continued to grow in America and Europe. I opened new hotels in London, expanded real estate in Chicago, and built a chain of luxury resorts along the coast of California. But for the first time, I didn't feel chained to my work. I had James by my side and later, children who filled our home with laughter. My mansion in Washington, once a sanctuary for one, became a house alive with family and joy. Sometimes late at night, I still thought of David. I wondered where he was, whether he had found some kind of redemption after I turned him away. But I never regretted my decision. Forgiveness can heal many things, but it cannot rebuild trust shattered by betrayal. What I did know, however, was this. Power can be stolen, money can be lost, empires can crumble. But dignity, strength, and love, those are treasures no one can ever take away. And so, I lived not just as a billionaire, not just as a survivor, but as a woman who finally found peace in America and joy in the love of a man who saw her not for her empire, but for her heart.